Years ago, the 7-Up company marketed their soft drink on the basis of what it was not. It was not another cola, but it was the uncola. That's the same approach the Enlightenment skeptics took. To undermine church and monarchy, God and the Bible had to go. But you still have to explain nature and history, so the Bible needed to be discredited and replaced with God-free, un-Bible stories. First, the foundational direct attack on the Bible sought to discredit inspiration by claiming the Bible books were written long after the lifetimes of the traditional authors. This late dating implied two things. First, the Bible books were not written by the inspired men, Moses, the prophets, and Jesus' apostles, but much later by unknown and uninspired Jewish scribes. Second, predictive prophecy was neutralized. For if books containing predictions were not written until after the fulfillment events, then these were really history, falsely portrayed as predictions made before the events. Next, they needed stories for nature and history that removed God and contradicted biblical ideas. To make this project sound noble, they adopted two respected terms and claimed that all of this was being done in the name of reason and science. Reason traditionally was an approach to understanding employing logic. Science was also an approach to understanding nature by observing, collecting, and analyzing evidence and then following that evidence towards the best explanation, or inductive empiricism. However, both words were redefined from an objective method for pursuing understanding to a particular philosophical position, materialistic naturalism. In other words, you were rational and scientific if you assumed that reality involved only matter and natural processes. If you doubt or reject materialistic naturalism, then you're irrational and unscientific. When you don't have a wealth of observations and evidence to build on, but you do have a story that you want to discredit, the easiest way to craft new stories to accomplish your goal is to identify the ideas you want to replace and then imagine opposite stories, in the hope that evidence yet to be found will eventually support them. Given what was known and not known about the natural world in the 1700s, I'm sure this was how most, if not all, of these new stories were manufactured. Since the Bible taught that an eternal God created the universe, the eternal God was replaced with an eternal universe, composed of eternal matter. The Bible taught that with the first sin, God placed a curse of death, decay, and decline on the natural order. However, the Enlightenment wanted to eliminate God and the Edenic curse upon nature, so European philosophers simply dismissed them from reality and went to work imagining an alternative natural universe that creates and organizes itself. And you can see this in the writings of Leibniz, Buffon, Rabelais, James Burnet, and others. This notion was foundational to all of the specific evolution stories that were imagined and put forward between 1700 and 1880. Without an intelligent creator, they imagined that nature itself must have an element of inventive creativeness, an inherent tendency for progress and upward organization. The underlying scenario is that early, simple, and primitive always evolves into later, complex, and advanced. As Genesis 1:6-10 and 2 Peter 3:5 indicated that the earth began covered with water and continents appeared later, Simon Laplace and Immanuel Kant imagined the solar system forming from hot gas clouds, throwing off chunks that cooled and congealed into orbiting bodies, planets, over time. Thus, the planets all began covered with a molten sea of magma that slowly cooled into crust and continents, with water coming much later in the form of warm, shallow seas. Genesis 2:5 and 6 indicates that prior to the Great Flood, a mist watered all of the earth's surface, so the early Earth had a temperate or even a rainforest climate. James Hutton and Charles Lyell countered that with the idea of uniformitarianism, the belief that the Earth's processes have always operated in the same way and at the same rates as are seen now. Thus, the present is the key to the past was applied to climate history. With Genesis 6 through 8 and 2 Peter 3:6 declaring that the earth was later covered with water again by a great flood, James Hutton and Charles Lyell asserted that all geological features could be explained by uniform gradual processes continuing over deep time. No catastrophic events were needed, especially the biblical flood. Uniformitarianism rejects catastrophic events making large and sudden changes to the landscape. Thus, canyons were carved out very slowly, a sand grain at a time, and mountains would grow very slowly over millions of years. Well, Genesis 1:20-25 says that God produced a number of distinct major groups of life forms, sea monsters and birds, then cattle and insects, at about the same time. The logical alternative was a story in which simple, single-celled life had slowly been transformed, by natural processes alone, into different, increasingly complex forms, with major groups developing out of earlier groups at different times much later. Charles Darwin published the winning story in 1859, claiming that natural selection could gradually change protozoa into fish, then amphibians that could crawl onto land, then reptiles, birds, and mammals. Assuming Lyell's uniformitarian geology story, Darwin believed that there were no catastrophic events to interrupt the process, so geological strata should be filled with evidences of many gradually changing life forms, slowly creating new major groups and forming a great single gradually branching tree of life. A naturalistic story for life's origin from inanimate matter required that early life must have been very simple, but a plausible-sounding story did not appear until the later 1860s, with Ernst Haeckel and T.H. Huxley speculating about life beginning in ocean floor slime. Darwin responded to Joseph Hooker's question in 1871 that life must have begun from a fortuitous mixture of chemicals in a warm little pond somewhere. 50 years later, in the 1920s, the Russian biochemist Alexander Oparin was still asserting that early life must have been very simple and arose from a fortuitous mixture of chemicals because of the inherent progress principle in matter. Genesis 1 through 5 portray humans as a special creation, language and technology capable from their appearance. To contradict that story, humans needed to be portrayed as only becoming human after a long period of evolution from animal ancestors, with language and technology appearing much later. After Darwin's general story was spreading, assertions were made in books published in 1863 and 1871 that humans must have arisen from some ape-like common ancestor, gradually evolving into man-like apes, then ape-like men, and finally Homo sapiens. Human language must have slowly developed from simple animal grunts and noises. Beginning with ape-like early humans in Africa, moving around in nomadic hunter-gatherer tribal groups, human civilization arose with settled cave dwellers, then small villages with agriculture, followed by small city-states, small kingdoms, and finally the early larger empires in India, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. After the sophisticated and advanced Greek and Roman empires, European civilization descended into centuries of the Dark Ages, as Christianity dominated Europe, an era of ignorance and religious superstition when knowledge and science were suppressed. Then we are told that around 1700 the Enlightenment broke the hold of organized religion and freed thinkers from ignorant superstition so they could openly investigate nature and history. beginning modern Western science, which continues to battle the last vestiges of repressive religion. Due to the gradual development tendency, every generation of humans must be more advanced than all before it. Thus, as you go back in time, earlier humans must have been increasingly less intelligent and technology capable, so that ancient stories, like the Bible, can be dismissed as myths and legends imagined by ignorant, superstitious, and pre-scientific people. Any evidence of technology judged to be too advanced for ancient humans is either declared to be a mystery or was possibly dropped off or left behind by some advanced race of aliens that visited the Earth long ago. After the assault on the validity of the Bible and the creation of un-Bible stories to contradict and replace biblical explanations for nature and human history, two more things were needed to successfully demolish the supernatural in Western civilization. First, people needed to be convinced to reject God and biblical ideas and embrace the new stories. Second, science had to be redefined in terms of materialistic naturalism, so only those kinds of explanations would be considered scientific, and the supernatural could be completely excluded, by definition, from the discussion of reality as inherently unscientific. The tools needed? Propaganda, logical fallacies, and persuasion devices.